Your moderator. Today we have a very special guest. You know him from Andor, Lord of the Rings. I mean, the list goes on and on. The Batman. You got it. Andy, come on down. There's Andy Serkis.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Hello. So nice to be here. I love Albuquerque. It's awesome. It's Thanks for having me.
So Andy, you've ever been to Albuquerque before?
No, this is my first time. It's awesome.
All right. So you guys get to be the first to introduce Andy to Albuquerque, and if you're from the surrounding area, because we do have a lot of people that travel in, I'm sure.
Great. What I want is a great recommendation for a restaurant.
Oh, that's a tough one. There's a lot to choose from in Albuquerque here.
Okay, if you can write them all down, that would be great.
It's all over the place.
We got a great list for you, Andy. We'll get you fed.
Fantastic.
So let's start out with a little Q&A here. Anyone got questions? Raise your hand, and we will ask Andy. Starting with the gentleman here.
So there's a YouTube video of you on YouTube where you said you did some consulting work for Godzilla 2014. My question to you, what does the alternate timeline look like where you get to tell people that you played both King Kong and Godzilla in your career?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. That's what I did. I mean, I came onto the project, that Godzilla project, quite late in the day. Gareth Edwards he'd shot the movie, and they had placeholder animation in, and then they felt that the character it didn't have kind of layers to it. So that they said, look, is it possible? We realise it's late in the day and it's not been part of the process. Not, very much unlike working on King Kong, which obviously I was in from the ground up on that character and spent a long time researching that. So this was sort of I started to think about basically Godzilla after the movie had been completed. So it was for a specific amount of shots. But I did find, what was important for them was to connect some way to this creature, and that's really at the root of what I do, I suppose. It's finding ways that we can, even though they are seemingly sort of untouchable, unreachable, bizarre creatures, that they somehow connect with humanity in some way. So I went about finding a physicality and a voice for that character and a way of being, and then we did several motion capture sessions at the Imaginarium, which was my production facility in London at Ealing Studios at the time. So it was an interesting challenge for sure, but it is kind of cool to have played both Kong and Godzilla. Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions?
Okay, well, I'll go and have lunch.
We've got a young man here to the left, our left.
I have a question about your asset journey. How did you do your voice for Gollum?
How did I do my voice for Gollum? Thank you for that question. So when I started working on the character, when I was auditioning for the character, again, sort of people have heard that that it was sort of creating a voice for a character, but what they don't appreciate is that when you're playing a role, that you can't just sort of pluck a voice out of the air. It has to come from something. It has to come from a physicality, a way that the character moves, a way that the character thinks and feels. And really what's at the root of the character of Gollum is a sense of, or Smeagol before he becomes Gollum, is the guilt of killing his cousin and taking the ring, and then the possession that he falls under when he falls under the power of the ring. So I decided that the way that he was tortured by what he'd done was that it was stuck in his throat, because he's called Gollum because of the way he sounds. So it was like, well, how do you actually make a sound that defines what the character is? So I was looking at all sorts of pictures and books and paintings to inspire a a physical way of representing the character. And then while I was working on this voice, my cat, whose name was Diz, after Dizzy Gillespie, the amazing trumpeter, came into our kitchen and literally started coughing up furballs. And this is absolutely true. And as I was watching him cough up furballs, his whole spine was rippling, and he was going through this kind of bizarre emotion. And then this kind of constricted, throaty, guttural sound came out of him, and then he coughed up furballs, and I thought, that's exactly what Gollum should be. So when he was going, that's what inspired it to become. That's how it came about.
So does your cat Diz claim all the royalties?
He absolutely owe my entire career to my cat.
I just finished Andor season 2. Absolutely amazing. Obviously relevant to any time period, but today it seems even more so. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Andor. I mean, Andor was such an extraordinary project to be part of. No spoilers if you haven't seen the series. Actually, who has seen series 2 of Andor here? Have you mostly seen it? Yeah. And who hasn't seen it yet? Who wants to see it? Okay. But anyway, in the first series, I play this character, Kino Loy, who kind of leads finally, in the latter part of the series, leads the prison break to freedom and rebellion. When I started working on that project, it was great to talk to Tony Gilroy, who's the writer, creator, who obviously directed Rogue One as well. And he was very, very keen to, given the way that the world is going, he wanted to write a piece about authoritarianism, about fascism, and the dangers of corrupted power. And so this series was a way of speaking to a very, very broad audience about a very, very important theme. And it's very interesting because, concurrently as being part of Andor, I was also directing an animated version of Animal Farm, which deals with, who knows the book of Animal Farm? Who's read the book out of interest? Okay, so it's about a group of animals that rebel against the humans and then form a utopia, which then gets corrupted and becomes overtaken by another kind of authoritarianism, which is led by the pigs. So there were strong parallels in terms of storytelling in many ways, actually, between Andor and Animal Farm. But I love stories that are allegorical stories for our times, that speak to us, that give us a way of dealing with, the pressures of the real world that we live in, but in a fantasy or sci-fi environment. And that for me is what, how important great storytelling is these days. You can say so much by couching it within a framework of, say, the storyline of Andor, to actually deal with, to really confront the pressures that society is under.
And a little one here.
Does it hurt your throat acting at Gollum?
Did it hurt my throat? No, not at all, no. I'll get over it. No, do you know what I did? I actually, because I was doing it for a long time, because we made those films over, the first trilogy was it took 3 years all in all. So I was doing it for a long time, but I invented a juice called golly juice, which is made of lemon and honey and ginger. And I used to drink this, and that stopped my throat from getting too sore.
What can you tell us about the hunt for Gollum? And what's your timeline, and how is it to direct yourself when you are an actor as well?
Very interesting question. So the question is, for those who didn't hear it, was the hunt for Gollum. What can I tell you? But also directing yourself if you're an actor and a director. So I'm very fortunate to be going back to work with all of my friends in New Zealand, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens, and all the team, Weta, the visual effects company that created Gollum, not least, but all of the visual effects in the movies. It's the timeline is this. If you work backwards, we released the film in December 27. So I'm very shortly about to be going back down there to start prepping the movie, to do location scouting and all the different things that you do, casting and so on and so forth, designing and everything. We're shortly about to start that process. And then at some point next year, we will be shooting, probably in the middle of next year. And then there's a year of visual effects. So it's a 2-year sort of round trip, all in all. So it'll be all ready for December the 27th. December 27th. And then in terms of directing myself, well, you know, it'll be the first time I would have directed myself to such an extent. I directed a film of Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, and I played Baloo the bear in that, but it wasn't such a huge role. This is quite a significant, you know, Gollum is quite a significant part of this. But it is a character that I know very, very well and who I've lived with for many years and kind of owns me in a way. So I mean, he's never far away from me. I'm sort of, because we went back, obviously we shot the Hobbit and so on and so forth. So he's never been too far away from me. So I think it shouldn't be too difficult to be able to step in and out of behind and in front of the camera. In this case, because I know the character so deeply and so well. I think it'd be more difficult if I was starting to direct myself in a completely fresh character, which I will be doing for another film, which afterwards actually. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Thank you.
Do you ever get tired of like playing the same role like over and over? Because you played Gollum for so many years, you're about to play him again. Like, does it ever get tiring being like recognized as him too?
No, I don't tire of that character because he's such a complex and richly drawn character. And Tolkien, I mean, of all of the characters in Tolkien's work, he has so many layers to him, and so there's always things to discover about him, and that's what I'm very much looking forward to about The Hunt for Gollum. It is another, it's an investigation of the character from a slightly different point of view, and but I don't tire of the character. The reason is I talk to so many people who feel affected by the character for so many different reasons, and talking to them about it kind of re-inspires me as to aspects of the character that I can see as related to them, whether they've suffered from being marginalized, whether they've been suffered from addiction, whether they've or depression or loneliness, or there are so many different parts of Smeagol / Gollum's persona that relates to me. I think that's why people respond to that character so much, because they all feel that there is perhaps a little bit of Gollum in themselves. Most people feel that bizarrely. So yeah, no, I don't tire, which is a good thing.
According to the web, and yeah, we know the web can be right or wrong, according to the web, you voiced 132 characters in Lord of the Rings. Now, I hope you got paid individually for each character.
I suspect I didn't.
Yeah. One, is that possibly a correct number to your knowledge? And two, how do you really keep your one person with one set of vocal cords? How do you keep those voices, or how do you really separate, so that people don't hear you and think it's Snoke, or think it's, the Andor character?
Well, I mean, just so to be clear about that was when I was doing the audiobooks for. So when I read the audiobooks.
So you did get paid for each one?
I did not get paid for it. I would not be sitting here, Frank. I would be on a sun lounger in a Bora Bora or something. Being quite bored, actually, because I don't like doing those sorts of holidays. But no. So when I read, what happened was that this is the story of how I came to do the audio books. During COVID, everyone was isolated, everyone was sort of trapped to a certain extent, and I don't know if many of you know, but I did this. I thought, how can we, what people would want to do, I think, is go on a journey, go on an adventure, but they can't because they have to stay indoors. And some people have got kids, and maybe they're, the kids feel trapped and so on. So I thought, what can I do to contribute as a storyteller? And I came upon this idea that I would do a reading of The Hobbit all in one sitting, and then raise money for the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, and some charities. And so we got in touch with the Tolkien estate and said, look, would you allow me to do a reading of The Hobbit in one go? And they said yes. And so we created this thing called the Hobbitathon. And did any of you hear it, by the way? Yeah. Great, one person. It was worth it. And so I read it from, I think I started at about 10 o'clock in the morning UK time, and it took 11 hours, and I remember 4 2-minute breaks in 11 hours, but I read the whole story. And I mean, it was a trial by fire because I literally went into sort of trance-like states halfway through because it was quite exacting, But there would be whole chapters, paragraphs rather, I'd go through and I'd be reading them, thinking I was reading Gandalf, and then I'd get to the end and it would say, said Bilbo, and I'd go, sorry guys, backtrack, So it was a bit of a trial by fire. But anyway, out of that, the publishers approached me and they said, look, that was great and well done, and you've raised money for charity because more than one person actually heard it. So would you read The Hobbit? Would you do an audiobook reading of The Hobbit? Which I did, and it took 2 weeks, and I did that. And then I thought, wow, that was, and then of course there's no room for mistakes there, and you have to work very hard on all the different characterizations. And then, as soon as I finished that, they said, will you do Lord of the Rings? I was like, oh my goodness. That was 6 weeks of me in a microphone, 8 hours a day, sitting there. Now, the only way that I could remember each character was my relationship to the microphone. So, for instance, if I was playing Gollum, he'd be, I'd be sort of down, physicalizing Gollum. And then if I was playing Gimli, I'd be a little bit higher, and if I was playing Elrond, and I found all these different physical poses so that I could sort of click into them every time I found, I was switching characters, and that was the way that I managed to do that. Anyway, 6 weeks later, I finished Lord of the Rings, and then I thought, thank God, I will never have to do this again. And they said, and would you like to do the Silmarillion? How many people here have read the Silmarillion, out of interest? Yeah, it's a difficult book. There's only 5 of you. I did do that, and that is an incredible book. And that, for those of you who don't know, it's the creation myth of the Lord of the Rings, which was never written as one book. It was written over 30 years of sort of information and stories and language and the mythology that, the lore that sort of was put together by Christopher Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien's son, eventually. So it was an amazing journey to read that book as well. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, that was it.
Sorry, this is going to be kind of a long lead up to the question, but nowadays body acting is done mostly with motion capture and digitized effects. Before that, you had actors like David Prowse in a Darth Vader suit, really elaborate costume. Before that, you had Boris Karloff, covered in prosthetics, playing Frankenstein's monster. In that style of body acting, outside of your own work, what's probably your favorite performance, and what are anything that would inspire you in your approach to that kind of work?
I mean, that's a great question, and you're right to kind of connect that lineage of playing physical characters and creatures and monsters. I mean, I grew up, I loved the original Planet of the Apes series, by the way. You know, I was massively, I was totally sort of entranced by the TV series, Planet of the Apes, and the original movies. But in terms, I think one of the most inspiring films that I saw growing up in terms of a character that I've really emotionally connected and felt for was Charles Laughton's performance of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I mean, when I was a kid growing up, I used to, do you remember, did any of you ever have the Aurora model kits of the Hollywood monsters? Because I used to paint those. They were little kits, which, you know, Phantom of the Opera and King Kong and Godzilla and you know, the Creature from the Black Lagoon and the Hunchback of Notre Dame was one of them. And I just remember having watched Charles Laughton's performance and just being so moved by this character that took on the sort of ills of the he just was this victim of circumstance, of being blamed, of being marginalized, and I just really felt for him, and I just thought his performance was extraordinary. And of course, the prosthetic makeup that he was wearing was, you know, in those days, that kind of makeup was very hard to wear because it was so thick, layers of prosthetics. I mean, Kim Hunter, I remember her talking about Planet of the Apes, and having to just kind of move her face all the time to get any expression through John Chambers' makeup. And nowadays, with performance capture and wearing just tiny little dots in your face, and not even that now, in the next iteration of motion capture, you don't even, in performance capture rather, you don't even have to have dots on your face. But, you know, it means that, for instance, characters like Caesar that I played, you can just internalize the performance, and it becomes much more about not having to fight through layers of prosthetics. So you're able to be a lot subtler in your active screen performance. So I think there's, you know, I mean, obviously people still, you know, Gary Oldman would play Winston Churchill, and that was an amazing performance, or think of, you know, Brendan Fraser in The Whale, or you know, there are a number of heavy makeup kind of performances, obviously, these days, but performance capture is an extraordinary technology because, as I say, it does allow you to play subtle and emotional beats without having to sort of fight your way through layers of makeup.
So we've been in a lot of expansive universes, both in Star Wars and Marvel now. Is there any pre-established, already established universe that you haven't been in that you kind of like?
Well,
You just say Star Trek, you have.
well, funny enough, Star Trek was one. No, I actually genuinely love Star Trek, and I would quite happily be, because that was the other TV series I loved growing up, was Star Trek. So yeah, I mean, if there's, you know, you can put a word in for me, that would be great.
So you talked about your relationship with Apes, and it's interesting that you got to play the Roddy McDowall character. And you being a fan of the original series, how much of his performance influenced your interpretation of Caesar and your version of Caesar?
Well, I mean, because of the timeline, it couldn't have affected my performance in a way, because obviously when Roddy McDowall was playing the character, it was much more evolved, and the way that they were speaking were basically kind of humans within within eight bodies, and their minds and linguistics were as we would speak. So what was extraordinary about, and the challenges with playing Caesar throughout 3 films was evolving It wasn't just playing a chimpanzee. It was, I mean, in the first film, it's Caesar. When we get to know the young Caesar, he's basically, in effect, he is being brought up by humans, so he understands human psychology a lot more because his father, in effect, is a human being who looks after him. Will, James Franco's character. Then when he's thrown into the facility, when he's like a young teenager, he has to find his inner ape and connect with a disparate group of apes, chimpanzees, orangutans and gorillas and so on. So he feels like an outsider there. He doesn't communicate with language, and therefore the sign language that was taught to him as a child, if you like, is what he then brings to the ape community. And then as the Alzheimer's drug, the ALZ13 drug, it increases the intelligence and the evolution of the apes on a rapid scale. Throughout the course of the movies, the challenge for us was to find a way of speaking, a way of behaving, a way of walking, that was growing and changing, becoming more human-like. So really, the first three films, this is what we're watching. We're watching the evolution of a society. And Caesar, obviously, because he's the first one to have received that drug, is the most evolved of all. And so it was a real challenge, using both sign language, which then became speech, and then in the second film, there's more constructed sentences that were written. But it was fine. You didn't suddenly want to jump into, they were just having a conversation, because it would have felt unreal and not grounded. So it was still using ape sounds, still the chimpanzee sounds and breath, and then broken sentences and single syllable words. And then in the third film, it was much more, again, expanded. And so much as though I'd love to have said yes, I was Roddy McDowell influenced my way into the character. It couldn't have been because of where he was starting, which is like thousands of years later.
This gentleman right here.
So you play a lot of roles in the entertainment industry: director, actor, motion capture, behind the scenes with your studio. What do you like to do the best, and why do you enjoy it over the other roles that you can play?
I think I really genuinely love them all, and I like going between them all, and I get a huge amount of pleasure. And the more I direct, the more I love directing, because it does incorporate so many of the other aspects. So working with ultra talented people, actors, composers, visual effects teams, production designers. I just love being in the middle of and helping to envision and create and bring together the story from a directorial point of view. I increasingly love to do more and more. But I like going, when you're directing a movie, and I'm just about to go off to New Zealand to do this Hunt for Gollum, which will be a 2-year going down a rabbit hole with this story. When I come out of that, there will be nothing more that I want to do other than just play a character. I know it. I can tell you now. To come back and someone say, "Can you just play that role?" I'll be like, "Yeah, thank you." I don't want to make any decisions. Just let me play the character. So I think going between all these, like bouncing like a billiard ball off or a pool ball off around a table is kind of how my career is, and what I love about it.
So, the first part I ever saw you play, it's still one of my favorites, was in Topsy-Turvy. And I was just wondering, number one, what's it like working with Mike Lee? And number two, in that movie, you play a choreographer, you have a very interesting way of moving. I don't know if that had anything to do with you getting into motion capture at all, or if that is completely different.
So Topsy-Turvy was, how many of you know who Mike Lee is, just out of interest, the director, film director? Great, so he's not travelled across the pond. So Mike Lee is a British film director who is very, very well known for creating films which don't have scripts, basically, he masterminds the whole thing. He has an idea for a story that he wants to examine, and then he brings together a bunch of actors, and then it's all improvised. And the way you work with him is through layers and layers and layers of improvisation. He starts you off when you're 2 years old and 5 years old and 10 years old, and you do, and then eventually it gets to a point where your character is old enough to go and get a job, and then you go off and you do that job, and you spend months working on characters, months and months and months, and then you come to do the film, and you come to shoot it, and again it's all improvised. So this film, Topsy-Turvy, was actually based on the story of Gilbert and Sullivan, who were two very famous, who created many famous operas, light operas, comic operas, at the turn of the 19th century. And I was playing this choreographer called John Doban, and we spent 9 months doing the research for these characters, and everyone was playing all of the actors of the time, and everyone to do this theatrical world that they lived in. And my character was the choreographer who choreographed all of the operas. And and the level of detail that you go into is quite extraordinary with Mike Lee. It's not just like you get a say, it's the opposite of just getting given a script and you going off and working on a character. It's all created through improvisation together. So John Doman was famously known for his choreography, but he was also as a dancer. And during the 19th century, there was this crazy dance fashion called legmania, and it was kind of like it was sort of this bizarre thing. I'm not going to do it for you now. But just sort of these weird kind of abstract kind of things that you're flicking your legs and turning around. In a way, Laurel and Hardy's dances sort of came out of legmania, that sort of musical style of movement. And so I spent ages working on that character. I think I was cast to play that role because Mike had seen me on stage doing some theatre roles where he'd seen me play quite physical parts. I mean, there are certain actors who work, we all work in different ways, but physicality has always been very important to the creation of characters for me. And I think that came out of a theatre background. When I first started off in theatre, in what you would call stock theatre, when you're in a company for some time and you're doing a play during the day, you're rehearsing that one, and then at night time you're performing a different play at night. So you sort of automatically have to. And I remember one of my first theatre job. I was doing 14 plays back to back, rehearsing during the day, performing at night. So you find a way of finding a different voice, a different physicality, a different, centering yourself in a different way to play all these different characters in different plays, ranging from Shakespeare through to modern plays, through to sort of classic plays. That's where I learned the facility. It come from doing stock theatre or repertory theatre, as we call it in the UK. And that's what Mike had seen in me when he cast me to play that role, which is a rather long-winded way of answering your question.
So the Lord of the Rings kind of achieved something 25 years ago that we really haven't to see again, and that was the adoption from literature to cinematic masterpiece. Having worked so intimately on that, what do you think set it apart compared to every other book to movie adaptation that we've had so far?
I think it's a true devotion and love and understanding, deep understanding of Tolkien's world, his lore, his, everything was approached in such dedication from every single department, and it came from the top. It came from Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, the writers, that triumvirate. Philippa is a Tolkien scholar and exceptionally well versed in him. Fran and Peter, Peter loved Tolkien, and they all knew the books intimately, and all of the books, all of Tolkien's work. But I think the thing that really and I agree with you. I think there's a level of authenticity in those films which it's hard to beat, because, and it was at a time when really sci-fi fantasy, you know, was not around. There weren't that many films that were investigating, and Tolkien would never, I mean, the difference between someone like George Orwell, and because I've just directed Animal Farms, you know, he was an allegorical writer and went out of his way to, for instance, with Animal Farm, that was very much written about, if he was writing about the pigs, it was about Stalin and Lenin and Trotsky, and that every single animal in Animal Farm is assigned to a particular person. He was writing a commentary, a social and political commentary. But Tolkien was so not interested in allegory. He thought that would be telling the audience what to think and feel. So what I think the way that the team on Lord of the Rings, why they were so successful, was that they managed to make films that connected emotionally with all of the characters. They managed to make them truthful to the characters from the book, and that went through casting, the way it was designed. Nothing felt like it was shiny and new and just you'd walked out of wardrobe. You know, everything was broken down. It was grungy. It felt grounded and real, and that was a huge part of it. They felt like historical pieces, that these worlds truly existed, and they weren't showing. That was just allowing the audience to find these worlds, and I think also, and this is quite significant. You know, in those days, studios never shared information about the filmmaking process. And what Peter did was groundbreaking in that not only did he create a family in New Zealand that was working very tightly together, but he created a universal family with you guys by sharing in the behind-the-scenes footage how everything was made, how it was put together, why the locations were chosen, why fabrics were chosen for costume. You know, the detail, the level of detail and thought was shared with everyone, and I think people really appreciated that level of being included, so that they felt part of the family too. And I don't think that can be underestimated. But I do think you're right. I think they feel like historically accurate pieces of cinema, as opposed to fantasy. You know, and there have been several. You know, and I'm not criticising them. There have been several adaptations of fantasy type stories, but you can see the costume design. You can see everything's lifted to a point where it just takes it away from feeling real. And I think that's why we all love those films. And I'm talking about people who were in them and why we love them so much, because you felt like you were making a historical piece.
And you can help out Disney one day.
I see.
Out of all the many roles you've done that I love, Ulysses Claw, Alfred, Richard from 13 going on 30, my personal favorite is your portrayal of Ian Dury in Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, because I think you didn't play Ian Dury, you were Ian Dury. I want to know how you came to play or portray,
well, thank you.
embody Ian
Thank
Dury, and how much do you remember the lyrics to Bill Ricky Dicky and would you recite it for us?
It's a good question. That's a good question, which we'll get to. So, for hands up, who knows who Ian Dury is? Okay, here we go. So I really love the fact that you know Ian Dury. Ian Dury was in the mid-70s, was a kind of proto-punk performer. He suffered from polio when he was a child, and he absolutely never thought of himself as disabled in any way. He was a fighter. He grew up. He went to art college, and he was right at the beginning of the punk movement. And in fact, Johnny Rotten is famously kind of copied Ian Dury's physicality. And Ian had this kind of lopsided gait in the way that he walked because of his polio. Johnny Rotten kind of took it and used it as a way of leaning on his microphone, when he was in the Sex Pistols. and made it and sort of did a version of Ian Dury. Ian was a poet. He was a sort of a beat poet, a rapper almost, in the mid-70s. But he wrote these extraordinary lyrics, and he was a firebrand. He was just like a crazy, out there, maniac performer, totally in the moment. And anyone who ever saw him on stage, and you can look him up. He is an extraordinary physical force on stage, so I, along with a very good friend of mine, Paul Virag, we decided that we'd make a biopic about him, and if I'd love you to see the film, because it is one of my proudest acting roles actually, other than Caesar, I think, obviously Gollum as well, and he was his but no, I truly loved playing Ian, and we got to know his family, his son Baxter. He released an album called New Boots and Panties, and on the front of that cover of that album is Ian Dury and his son Baxter. And the film is very much about his relationship with his son and being a punk rocker and being a parent, and a wild out there performer. And so we got to know his family very well, and when we delivered the first, I'll never forget delivering the first draft of the script for them to look at. I can't actually repeat what they said, because it's, I'll get cancelled. But they said, oh no, he was much more of a C word than that. And this is his family, and so we knew we were on the right track. Anyway, it's a very, the film is called Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and that was one of his most famous songs as well. Do you know that song, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll? That song, right? And then another one of his songs was Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. You must have heard about that song. Hit me with your rhythm stick, hit me, right? Okay. And another song that you're talking about is called Billy Dicky, and he basically wrote about all these characters. They're all character-driven. A bit like, I tell you what, he's a sort of English version of Tom Waits, I would say, in a way. In the way that he writes about characters and stories about people, very much sort of seaside postcard snapshot images of various different characters. Anyway, the beginning of Billy Dicky, I can't remember all of it, but he goes, "Good evening, I'm from Essex, in case you couldn't tell. My given name is Dicky. I come from Billericay, and I'm doing very well." There's another song he wrote called Reasons to Be Cheerful, Part 3. Have you heard of that? Reasons to be cheerful, Part 3. Summer body on working folly, good golly, miss body and boats. Hammersmith Pally, the Bolshoi Valley, jump back in the alley and nanny goats. 18 minutes gambles, Dominic camels, all other mammals plus equal votes. Seeing Bill and Ricky, people I can't remember anymore. Anyway, it's a fantastic song, Reasons to Be Cheerful. Have a listen to it.
Was it difficult to make different voices for different Gollum emotions?
Was it difficult to make different voices for Gollum? Right. Well, that's interesting because so when I started working on it, Gollum had one voice, and then obviously as the script was developing, and we realised that the Smeagol part of his personality was really like, because he had a sort of split personality of disorder, and Gollum was like a survivor part of him, so his voice was much more kind of lower and guttural and kind of choked. Whereas Smeagol was like the more innocent side of himself. This was in The Two Towers, the second film, and so he had a much kind of higher, more nasal, we decided, more sort of slightly more nasal, sweeter voice, and so that we could have conversations between the two parts of his personality. So that was quite a big decision as to how we would do that. But then in the third film, we decided that in fact, who was more dangerous, Smeagol or Gollum? And in a way, with Gollum, at least you know where you are with the character, because he's the survivor, and he sort of does what he says, and he behaves. How you see his behaviour is what he is. He's not hiding anything, but Smeagol was actually a little bit more devious and a bit more, what we would say, passive-aggressive. So it sort of, the character shifts between the films and changes as we're going through. And well, we'll see where this character goes when we see the next one.
All right, well, it's actually about that time, guys. He's got many characters he needs to feed. So we want to thank him for coming out to Albuquerque. Come out to his table after he's got all his characters, get an autograph, get a photo, make him welcome.
Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to meet you.